even after 1967, when we reunited Jerusalem, there were very few people living here. A lot of Arabs started building their homes here in the 70s and 80s, and it wasn't until the late 80s that Israel realized that this was the city of David. I know that sounds like so crazy, but they didn't realize how important this spot was. In the meantime, you had a whole Arab neighborhood that had sprouted here, and one of the political issues that we have now are people are saying Israel's undermining a traditional Arab neighborhood. Okay, even though, like I said, we've got the pictures that there were very few houses here, but that's like part of, you know, what comes up, what Israel comes up against, and a lot of what's happening here is underground, which is where we're going. This is the temple. This is the king's palace, which is probably where we're standing over right now, and this is the key to Jerusalem, is the water, because 6 months out of the year we don't have rain. So how do you ensure that your population has enough to drink? There's a spring. The whole city of David is built around protecting the spring. It probably did not look like this. This is an old, you know, they need to do this in pencil because they keep finding new things, all right? But ensuring that you could hold on to the spring is the key to what I'm about to show you. This is an Arab neighborhood called Silwan. It's actually built on the cemetery. If you look closely, you see caves underneath the houses in the rock. Yeah. Those are burial caves. Whoa. All right? At the edge of the lowest row, you can't really see it so well. There is one little. How am I going to show it to you? Look at the slope of green. There's a tree without any leaves on it, kind of hanging out on its own. See what I'm talking about? If you look to the right of it, on the cliff, there's what looks like a very low building, a one-story building with a door. The cornice in that building is very Egyptian. It is 3,000-year-old tomb, and it says that it's the tomb of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, we know that King Solomon had a lot of fathers-in-law because he married like all the women in the area, and one of his wives was Pharaoh's daughter. Is that her tomb? We don't know for sure, but it could very well be. The time fits and the whole thing fits. Okay, so this was one big burial area because it's outside the city. It was also much, much deeper in the day. See where those cars are driving? Yeah. It was 60 feet deeper in the olden days. It was very deep, which is why when the Jebusites were here, you could protect it just by having a tower here because your enemies are over there. They have maybe arrowheads or something. All right, so you're good to go. It's very deep. But this neighborhood here used to look like this. 100 years ago, there were Yemenite Jews who lived in these little houses. This is an actual picture. It's called the Yemenite Village in 1905. All right, there was nobody else there. And so again, this is one of like the lies that we have to combat. This is the bill, like when they decided to build a neighborhood for them in the city of David. This is a press release from 1892. There was nothing on that hill. Now, when people come out here now, so, you know, the Palestinians will say, look, this is our traditional village. We've been here for hundreds of years. And they're not showing these pictures that show that that's not true. Okay. Now, there were Jews living here until 1929, when there were Arab riots all over the country. And the Jews fled here. The ones who weren't killed fled. The British, because it was under the Mandate period, told the Jews, don't come back, it's too dangerous. And now and then in 1948, of course, this all goes under Jordan, and you end up with an Arab neighborhood. But it wasn't traditionally anything. This was Jewish, where the Jews were forced out and the Arabs took over. And now they tell the world, this is Arab Jerusalem that the Jews are taking over from us. And most people don't know their history, either willfully or because they're just don't want, you know, they're just lazy or stupid, okay, and aren't able to counteract that. All right, but if you have these pictures, you see very easily what's really been going on here. Now, there are Jews who have once more moved into this neighborhood. They don't go knock on their neighbor's door to borrow a cup of sugar, okay? They live here with security, but they have bought their houses, and they say it's not right that this is not considered a Jewish neighborhood because the Jews were killed and forced out of here. If we really want things to be moral and fair, Jews need to be able to live in this neighborhood as they once did. This neighborhood was built in the First Temple period, this neighborhood below us. It was destroyed in -586. And one of the things that was found here was a toilet from that time, which tells you that the people living here must have been the high class, because who has toilets in those days? I mean, like, some people today still don't have toilets. We think that the palace was here, and that was where the ministers lived. And inside that toilet, we found parasites from uncooked meat. So if you'll excuse me, the last poop that was taken in -586, okay, they were eating raw meat. Okay, they were under siege, and we found the remains of a kind of plant called kubeza that grows wild, that they were clearly eating, meaning they were starving, that my father ate in the 1940s because they were also starving in Jerusalem. It's a plant that's eaten by people under siege. Okay, so it just like recreated itself. All right, so let's now head down and into that area. Okay, here is where the archaeologist who's working here, Eilat Mazar, whom I interviewed a few months ago, phenomenal woman, she believes that this is where David's palace was. Okay, she found a very large structure here from 3,000 years ago. It's at the top of the hill. All right, it makes sense that this would be where the palace would be. She found that. That's a replica. The original's in the Israel Museum. Why is that so interesting? Because that is a Phoenician design. The Phoenicians were in today's Lebanon. What on earth would a Phoenician design be doing in the middle of the Judean hills? And then you open up the Bible, and what the Bible says from the book of Samuel Bet, it talks about Hiram, king of Tyre, sending messengers, carpenters and masons, meaning stonemasons, and they built David a house. So Tyre is where the Phoenicians were, okay? So the Bible is giving us a hint. What do stonemasons carve? Designs that they know. So this is how a Phoenician design comes into Jerusalem, and this she is using as a proof that if she found this design here, that means that this must be where the palace is. Now this becomes a design that's ubiquitous in First Temple period. If you pull out a 5-shekel coin, this is on the back of your 5-shekel coin. All right? So this becomes just associated with the First Temple period, and this is where it starts, okay? So the Bible is not telling us that in 3,000 years you will find this design and it'll help you prove it, okay? But you can, you can read the Bible and see, like, does it help with, the opinion of the archaeologists, okay? So that's one thing. The other thing that was found here were those bulle that I showed you upstairs, the ones from Jeremiah, okay, which also makes sense because the ministers hang out with the king, right? Look, most people in the ancient world were not literate, right? Like, you wouldn't have a kid necessarily reading, except what's interesting also about Judaism is that when you're taught to teach your kids Torah, you're being told, teach your kids how to read. And being literate is a tremendous advantage. I mean, definitely today, but in the ancient world for sure, because most people had no idea. But it means that you're open to reading things that other people are writing, you're open to knowledge, you're open to leaving things behind that people will read hundreds of years later that you wrote, which is what the Bible is. So we don't even think about it now because virtually all people are literate. But in the ancient world, that's a very big thing. Teaching your kids the Bible means teaching your kids how to read. All right, reading between those lines, okay? So, so that's what she thinks she found over here. And now we're going to go out and down into the neighborhood of the First Temple period. So you're looking, this wall here is 4,000 years old. All right, this is the wall that the Jebusites, remember David conquers an already existing city from the Jebusites, all right? And this was their stepped structure to probably protect the water source, all right? And protect their town from any kind of marauders. Behind me over here was a very exciting find, a dead dog. Is that exciting find, a dead dog? Yes. There was a little pyramid kind of thing here. When they picked it up, there was, I think, 2 dead dogs. And they got really excited, the archaeologists, because we have an entire cemetery of dogs buried just like that outside of Ashkelon from the Persian period. All right? We're not really sure what was going on. They had some weird things with dogs. But this connects it to the Persian period, which is 4th, 5th century BCE, okay? Now, we then open the book of Nehemiah, which is written in that time period, the beginnings of the Second Temple period, and he talks about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And if you look at this little structure over here, it doesn't fit in with the original wall, it sticks out. So those dead dogs gave us a clue that perhaps it's Persian period. Nehemiah from the Bible is Persian period, and he reconstructs the walls of Jerusalem. So it could be that we're looking at a piece of wall that was reconstructed by Nehemiah and the Jews who were coming back from Babylon, and the dogs are the clue and the link to that whole thing. All right, so archaeology will use whatever they can, wherever they can, and piece it together. It's detective work. I know. We're looking at the neighborhood of First Temple Jerusalem. They found a layer of ash here, minus 586, so they know this was destroyed. The first temple was destroyed. This is a classic house from that time period, what's called a four-room house. There's a model of it up there, so I'll show it to you then. And that was found here. You can see the staircases. That's the toilet I was talking to you about before.
Oh.
Okay, which probably everything dropped into some kind of water channel. Mm-hmm. Okay. The square thing over there.
Oh. With the mossy hole.
Oh. Okay. The period that begins the monarchy here, around, let's say, Saul and David, like around minus 1000, is an incredibly chaotic period in the world. All right? The few hundred years beforehand, you have had droughts. Okay, we talk about the droughts now in the Middle East. You had it then as well. And you had fires and you had famine, because if you have a drought, you're going to have famine. And you have people on the move. That's when the Mycenaean civilization falls apart. Santorini, which is a beautiful island off of Greece now, but it's a volcano. It blows at some point. There are people who connect the explosion of Santorini with the 3 days of darkness, which is one of the 10 plagues that comes to Egypt when the Jews are leaving. There are people who say that that's what was happening. The entire Middle East went dark and everything was closed. Okay? There's a lot going on there, a lot of civilizations falling apart, a lot of people on the move. It's also the beginnings of the Iron Age. Okay, like why does the Bronze Age end and the Iron Age begin? All right? Part of it is practical. There is iron in the world. I mean, there's iron ore, but they didn't know how to smelt it. They weren't able to get heat hot enough to be able to smelt it out of them. So that's being figured out as well. But that means a tremendous change again in the material culture. You have better weaponry if you have iron, right? You can cut stones better, and that's a huge difference. That's not all over the world. It's just here in the Middle East. That's the time period of moving from the Bronze into the Iron Age, okay? And that's exactly what the Bible focuses in on without saying it like that. Like the Philistines have better weaponry than the Jews, who have like 2 swords between them. The Philistines knew how to smelt iron. So again, when you start putting the science into an overlay with the Bible, then you start realizing the backdrop of the things that are happening. All right? So assume that's the palace, and this is where the VIPs lived, right? That tower is Hasmonean. Remember I showed you on the other side of the hill, the parking lot where I said we have the remains of the battle with Antiochus? This is the other side of it. So when we talk about the Accra, this enormous tower that was like took over 20 years to destroy, it's sitting, if this is the city of David, it's like sitting right across it. This is one side and that was the other side. Right? So they found this a long time ago, but only when they found the part in the parking lot did they put the two of this together and realize that they were looking at 2 ends of the same thing, which was very cool. That was like a really big deal when they were like, whoa, now we just finished the story. Okay, 4-room house, which I spoke to you about. I'll show you the model. The way you build your house tells you a lot about who you are. Mm-hmm. The houses that the Jews live in reflects a lot of the way they live, meaning they have a place for cooking and a place for the children to sleep. The children do not sleep with the parents. In Judaism, there's this, modesty is not the right word, but there's this idea of like, not everything is all out there. The Canaanites slept with their kids and then whatever. In Judaism, but what's so interesting about it is that it brings God in the ancient world. The gods, first of all, were usually against people, usually fighting the gods, and that's not what happens in the Bible. The Bible is like God loves you. He's like your biggest backer, but what it means is how do you bring God into every day? Like Judaism doesn't say be celibate, quite the opposite. Okay, the first thing that Noah is told to do when he gets off the ark is have children. Okay, but it means do it in like a framework of like monogamy, and that's why marriage is called kiddushin. It's actually holy. The idea of holy matrimony. That's what it means: is bring God into your relationship. So what's very interesting is that we're not told to not enjoy life and to not enjoy what people want to do. But when you limit it in a certain way, then you make it holy. It's not just an action, it's made holy. When you bless the food, you're not just saying, I'm entitled to this food. You're saying thank you. That basic gratitude. Mm-hmm. Now, I was talking to you about literacy. One of the burial caves across here says on it, whoever robs this cave shall be cursed. So somebody didn't listen because the whole place was robbed. But what that means is they're assuming that even grave robbers can read. You don't put up a sign if somebody can't read it, right? So if even grave robbers can read, that's telling you that literacy is pretty, which is usually not your highest level of society, that literacy has really infiltrated society to a great degree. You don't know how to read yet. So now this neighborhood here is a mix of an Arab and a Jewish neighborhood. All right, so one home could be Jew, because when they get the money together, the Jews are trying to buy the houses here because then that gives us the rights to dig underneath it. Yeah. Okay. Usually, what happens? It's a wealthy foreigner who will buy the house, and then you have Jewish young couples that that rent it from them. They divide the house into a few different apartments, and they live here. So you have a couple hundred Jewish families living in this neighborhood now, but sometimes you'll find one house Jewish and the next house is Arab. Everybody gets along because it's under Israel. There's security here. And there's a very interesting coexistence happening here in the city of David, of all places. Okay, so this long thing here is the city of David. Here's that parking lot. We came out of Dungate. Here's the old city. We came out of Dungate. We looked down the parking lot. We came in the entrance. Now we've walked down to here. Okay, and we're going to be walking. We'll see how far we get down to the bottom area. Okay, not through the water tunnels or anything. All right, so this is the whole business. One of the things that they found here is a 4,000-year-old olive press and also an altar. Remember, in the old days, everybody did altars. And what they're thinking is they have found the Jerusalem of the Jebusites. Jerusalem is only mentioned once in the 5 books of Moses, in what we call the Chumash, the Torah. It's mentioned over 700 times in the prophets and all the extra writings, all right? And it's mentioned kind of obliquely. When Abraham comes to Jerusalem, he meets with someone named Melchizedek, who's the king of Shalem. And we feel that that was Jerusalem, and it could be that we have now put Melchizedek in an archaeological spot. Because the important thing is that he's going to be near the water. And of course, anybody who's anybody has an altar and an olive press and a place for doing sacrifices. So that was found here, and that's very, very interesting. And they found all kinds of other things. They found caves full of broken pottery from different time periods in this whole area. There's archaeology going on here all the time. Pottery is the thing, and that's the main thing that you're finding in the digs that is giving you some idea of the civilizations here, because everybody used pottery and pottery broke. So that's the main thing that you're going to find is pottery. Look, the key to living in the 6 months of the year where there's no rain is the springs. And it's the same up where they live now in Eli. When you go up to Eli, you see a lot of the terracing in the mountains, right? You got a lot more food from terraced farming. But where'd you get the water for the terraced farming in the 6 months? What you have, these mountains are made of limestone, and limestone is porous. So the rain comes in, trickles into the mountain, and then every once in a while meets a layer of marl, which is like clay, and can't go through anymore. Forms what's called an aqueduct, and it comes out of the side of the mountain. Those springs that come out of the side of the mountain are the key to life for those 6 months where we don't have water. They run all year round. All around Eli, that whole area of Shomron, full of springs coming out of the side of the mountain, and that's where you're going to find the ancient villages. All right? Okay? And they, like I said, they run all year round. Jerusalem is the exact same setup. You have the city on the top of the mountain, you have the spring coming out of the middle of the mountain, and you have your agriculture either below the spring level on the mountain or down in the valley. All right? So the Jebusites did that. We're not sure how it was protected, because this makes it vulnerable. Because your enemy can come and just capture the water and you're done. All right? So you have to protect your water source. Now there's thinking, since they put this picture up here, this would have been the temple, by the way, the kind of the administrative center of the priests, the palace, which incidentally is just a very large 4-room house, okay, courtyard in the middle, and the town. They're thinking that maybe now, and that's what they're looking for, the walls of the city went around like this, okay, which seems to make more sense. Put the spring in the city, but then your walls are lower and it's easier for the enemy to come in. So we're not really sure what went on here. There's a lot of digging going on. They have found parts of walls. They're trying to figure out what went on here, okay? And then there was a river that ran through here and collected here. What happens here is Hezekiah at minus 701 has a very big problem. The same guy who built that broad wall that we saw in the old city, it's that same time period. The Assyrians are coming. The Assyrians have already decimated the northern part of the country and exiled most of the tribes from the northern part. And they're coming after Jerusalem, Santorini, and he has to protect Jerusalem. So one of the things that we think, and not everybody agrees, but that we think he does, is he builds a pipe that drains the water from here, goes underneath the city, puts the water in here, and then extends the walls. And that's how he keeps the water safe inside the city. And that's the water tunnel that I'll show you today, but we're not going into, okay? We don't know how he dug it. It has no shafts. They started from two different ends and met in the middle. The Bible obviously frames it as a miracle, okay, which it possibly could have been. Geologists are down there slightly more practically trying to find a fissure in the rock or maybe something natural. They're not finding it. It's a very big question how that was built. They don't have ground-piercing radar. They're 20 meters in solid rock. How the heck do they know where to go and where to meet? But that saves Jerusalem. All right, that totally saves Jerusalem because the water source is now safe. All right, the bottom line is that David realizes that he can't keep ruling out of Hebron because it's in Judea, and he's a Judean, and they'll just say you're favoring your own tribe. Okay, so he's got to get a capital city. All right, and this is what he does. Here, you want to read? No. No? Okay, then I'll read. I have to get my glasses out. I'll read it in English. Okay. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Okay, the king had set out for Jerusalem against the Jebusites. The Jebusites were controlling Jerusalem, who inhabited the region. David was told, "You will never get in here. Even the blind and the lame will turn you back." This is an ancient diss, okay? All right, yo mama. This is an ancient yo mama, all right? So what's very interesting, just as a sidebar, is, we have found contracts written on the back of idols. It was like the notary of the ancient world would be God, right? So you can put a contract in the back of the Bible. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that Abraham might have been here with Melchizedek about 700 to 800 years before. And now, one of the interesting interpretations of this line is that the Jebusites pull out the peace treaty between Melchizedek and Abraham. And they say, you can't attack us here because your forefather signed an agreement with our forefather. What's lame and blind? An idol. An idol is lame and blind, right? You're thinking about a person who's not a good soldier. But an idol is also lame and blind. So there's one very interesting interpretation that I went to at an academic conference that said that this is an allusion to this ancient contract that they're pulling out and saying, guys, you can't do anything. So let's say that that's true. So why do they still attack? Because the Jebusites who inhabited this at the time of David are not the same people who inhabited it during the time of Abraham, okay? But it's just a very interesting look into, don't read something just the literary interpretation. Try and get a little bit beyond it, and maybe they're giving a hint here, okay? All right, so, oh my God, I really need my glasses, okay? David, you will never get in here. But David captured the stronghold of Zion. That's like that big tower that we saw before, the big staircase. It is now the city of David, okay? All right, on that, in modern day Hebrew, the word that's written in Hebrew, we read the English translation, I'll take it back now, is tzinor. What's a tzinor, Netzach?
Water.
Okay, tzinor in modern Hebrew, and this is why you have to be careful of circular reasoning. A tzinor in modern day Hebrew means a pipe. Because of this verse, they came in somehow through a water channel into the old, that's how they infiltrated into the city of David. So modern Hebrew, so I'll come here with people who know Hebrew, and this is why this is difficult, and I'll read this to them in Hebrew, and they'll say, oh, they came in a pipe. I'll say, careful here. In modern Hebrew, pipe means tzinor because of this. It didn't necessarily mean pipe then. It was something to do with water. So Charles Warren, one of those PF guys, found this. And he said, wow, I just answered how David's guys infiltrated into Jerusalem. Down there on the bottom is the valley. They crawled up this shaft. The Jebusite girls are walking here back and forth to the spring, you know. They pop up and say, boo, ah, right? She drops her pot. Then they go up here and go into the old city the way we just came out. You with me here? And that's how David captures Jerusalem, okay? He infiltrates through the water system. You with me here? You're looking like...
My eye got caught by the pottery.
Ah, okay, which is just put there today. Now, all that idea held for over 100 years. Until the Israeli archaeologists just about a decade ago realized that this is a natural karstic shaft in the mountain, okay? Meaning it's like a natural cave in the mountain. During that time, this was solid rock. Where we're standing right now had not yet been cut out. Look above your head, Allison. You see there's a difference? That's like flatter, and then suddenly it starts getting rougher? Okay, so now follow me to the top of the stairs, and I'll show you. We'll turn around and I'll show you, and I have also a sketch that shows you that when David's guys got up here, this was totally closed. They might have heard the girls walking above them, but they couldn't have come in the way we're standing now. Yeah, they brought Chinese acrobats in here to try and climb up the shaft because apparently Chinese acrobats are the most limber people in the world, but they couldn't get up there. But let's assume that everybody then was double jointed and very, limber. Okay, now you see that then this is floor level. And you can see staircases, and it also makes much more sense. Why would they dig down in order just to come back up again like we're doing, right? You didn't waste your energy in the olden days and just dig for fun. So behind us here, now you can see distinctly the two levels in the wall, right? So all of this was solid rock 3,000 years ago, and they might have come up that shaft, but they wouldn't have been able to deal with the girls. The girls were up here. All right, and they were going in over there. So why does all this change? And again, this is based on the archaeology as I understand it until today. They could come up with something next week that'll totally undo it. We're going to go down there and I'm going to show you what that is, okay? So Warren, it's called Warren's Shaft after Charles Warren, and the theory held for a long time. But now we realize that that's not how they came into Jerusalem. So how did they come into Jerusalem? One second. Here. This diagram shows you what I explained. Here. Okay. In those times, it would have looked like this. See? Here's the shaft, but it didn't break through. All right. Only later on is it opened up to the way we see it today. All right?
So how they got in?
So how did they get in if this is not how they got in? Okay, so I'll answer that question in a few minutes when we get to a different place. But in the meantime, look at this room. When the archaeologists found this room, it was completely filled with dirt. Now, nobody in the ancient world is going to all this trouble to cut out a room and then backfill it. Something must have happened here. They also, you can see, they started digging in that direction and then they stopped. All right? What's going on here? What we think is going on here, maybe, it's not for sure, is why this beam is holding up that rock. We think that there was possibly an earthquake or something that made this room, shaky, like they were afraid to use this room. Maybe the ceiling started coming down or something, and therefore they blocked it up and didn't go this way. They went down to the shaft in a different way, which is now what I'm going to show you. They keep it dark on purpose, though, because we're underground now. They don't want a whole lot of stuff growing on the walls if they can help it. You guys feeling the water? Okay, we're inside the mountain. Nobody mopped here this morning. This is the water that's coming in from all the rains through the mountain. So what the archaeologists, when they found this room, it was also completely full of dirt, and they dug it out from the top to the bottom. That's why these poles went up in sections, because they would dig out a little bit and then it would put in a supporting pole, et cetera, until they got to the stone. And what they think here, although there's not agreement with everybody, is that this was the original Canaanite pool that the Jebusites had, that the girls would come to, that hole, that doorway, is how they connected it when they rerouted it into Hezekiah's tunnel, and they basically dried this up and rerouted it into a different tunnel. If you look on the right-hand side of that door, you see a square, like in the wall, a little bit above, to the right of the blue. There was once a plaque there that isn't there anymore. And it could be that that's what it said. Like this was part of the massive waterworks done during Hezekiah's time. We don't know, but something was there. All right. What was interesting also is when they found this, there were a lot of fish bones here. I guess it had been used as some kind of, dump afterwards, after they drained the water. And we know what fish they were from. They're from the Nile and the Mediterranean. There is no fish in Judea, naturally. We're up in the mountains. So it shows that we were either trading with people who were around or, or whatever. But obviously, we were getting fish here. We weren't doing the fishing on our own. There are very few periods where we controlled the coast. During the Maccabees we did, during Solomon, but most of the time not. Okay, so now we'll walk up through here.
Now we do.
And now we do. Now people argue with us about the hills. It's a little bit different than it used to be. Right, the sin of the spies. What happens? Yara, tell me, what's the sin of the spies? So we left Egypt, right? We got the Torah at Sinai. We're waiting to come to the land of Israel with Moses. He sends out 12 spies to scout out the land. They're initially called scouts. Only afterwards are they called spies. And they come back and they say, everything is massive. The fortifications are massive. The people are giant. We're not going to be able to conquer the land. And for that, they're punished. And that whole generation dies out in the desert, 40 years in the desert. This is what they saw. All right, these are the massive fortifications from the Bronze Age that they are looking at, that are surrounding Jerusalem. All right, the stones are held up just by the sheer weight of the stone. All right, so you get an idea of maybe why they were so scared, right? Like they had just come from Egypt where there's pyramids and that's a sign of power, right? Okay, so yeah, now we're going to switch with these people. Okay, so this is supposed to give us an idea of what this might have looked like then. Hang on a sec, it'll come down. All right, you can see that's all part of the big tower around the fortress, around the spring. You're looking at it. See how big the stones are? All right, now it's not like they hadn't seen big buildings before, right? They'd seen the pyramids in Egypt, but they know that it means tremendous power. This is recreating okay, the fortress around the spring. We're looking at the water pool, and this is the fortress that would have protected it, even though they're not sure if it looked exactly like this or not. Okay, so Jerusalem's on our right, the Mount of Olives is on our left. We're looking south here. We're looking at people coming to Jerusalem. So if they had drones in those days, which of course they didn't, this would have been the shot that they got of Jerusalem. Flat roofs.
Why flat?
Because you used your roof. You needed it flat. The palace of the king, big four-room house, where the priests were, and the temple. So the water pumping from out underground underneath us is going in there and has been for the last 2,700 years. If you want, you can just go into the beginning and come back out so you get a feel of it. Because we're going into the left here where it says Canaanite Tunnel. We're going to go that way. These are their water channels that led from the spring into their fields to water their fields. When it's raining, though, they would put a big rock here because why waste the water, okay? So we're going into one of the Canaanite water channels. And since this is the nice way of not having to go into the water. Does that blue light look familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah? Did we see that blue light before? Here, you know what? You guys can go here. Just go here a second. You can go through there. Just peek out. You want to peek out, Nessa? Go through. His grandmother's helping him break the law. Okay. Just look through. Do you see where we were?
Yeah, we were up top.
Exactly. We were looking down. That's the pool we were looking down to. Remember where I told you where the fish were? Okay. So now, this is the latest theory, which he doesn't know because he just didn't tell, otherwise he would have told those people. This is the latest theory of how David's guys get in. That they came in the way we're going, that Sinor was the Canaanite water channel. They came to here, all right?
Yoav went up.
Now remember, Hezekiah's tunnel is 300 years later. This is minus 1,000. Hezekiah only does this bypass since in minus 700. Okay? So at that point in time, the water is going from the spring into here. It's not going there. You with me? All right? It's filling what's now dry. And so they come up to this point, and at this point, you've captured the flag. You've captured the water. And that this is how they get in. Because we know it's not Warren's shaft. This is the newest theory. They may change it in a year from now. But right now, this is holding that the way we're going right now is how David captures Jerusalem. You with me? Okay, and that's why I pointed out the blue light to you, because I knew you were going to see it from this side. All right? So you see where we are? We're down at valley level, at least of today, right across from Silwan, what we keep seeing from the top.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like I have, like, my feet haven't moved since I got up here because I'm just really taken back by that experience.
You're like jumping into history here. You're jumping into the Bible, you're jumping into history. There's nothing like it. This just became three-dimensional. Yep, power of place. And then it all starts making sense. Right? Because otherwise just like theoretical, but yeah.
Right. Yes.
Now this was also a neighborhood from the First Temple period, but it was abandoned, not destroyed. Remember the neighborhood up there with the toilet? Yeah. I said they found a layer of destruction. So this is the downside of being close to the king, is you got to hang out with him until he goes down. But if you're just like some of the common man and you're like, no, this is not looking good, I'm out of here, right? So this section they took off. So now we're walking towards where the spring emptied out. We're going to be walking through the neighborhood of the City of David, which is up there. You see, this is the whole neighborhood of the City of David. Yeah. So that's a Jewish house, you could tell, because of the flag, but it's interspersed all the way through. And the question is if where the walls of the city were. Right? Did they encompass the spring? Were they higher up the mountain? For a long time, it was thought they were higher up the mountain. Now they're not so clear about that. And part of that is what we're going to be walking through now. They're doing some excavating down here. This over here is in all likelihood where the kings were buried. All right, there's a place called King David's tomb on Mount Zion. Which I don't believe, and a lot of other people don't believe, is actually where King David was buried, because it says in the book of Nehemiah, that he was buried in the city of David. All right, and this is the city of David. All right, now why are the tombs not here anymore? This was turned into a quarry, which is where they cut the stones in order to build the buildings, and it's quite possible that the tombs were destroyed. Like you take over the place, you know, you're going to destroy where the kings were buried. But this is very, very likely where the original kings were buried. It was over here. This is like really the pits. So go down a little bit on an angle. So where do you think the water is? You think the water has followed us? How does water flow? Down, right? So what we think we found here is the pool, the ancient pool. All right? This was all covered with dirt until, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And they were putting in a pipe for the neighborhood above, and they heard a clink. When you hear a clink in Jerusalem, you call an archaeologist, okay? So they called the archaeologist, and this is what they found. They found the end of Hezekiah's tunnel. All right? See what's going on through here? All right, what you went into at the very beginning, the people aren't coming through here at this point. The people come out earlier, but this is the end, and it drained into the pool. Now, what we have here is the second temple pool, which is why some of the stones here are Hasmonean, okay? Because there was an enormous pool here that you would come to. Look how fertile that is. Nobody's watering that. All right, there's an enormous amount of water that's still like draining into here. My understanding is we just bought this piece of land. The Greek Orthodox Church owned this little orchard, and my understanding is the money was just raised and Israel was able to buy it to do some digging in here. We have 4,000 years of rubble that rolled down the mountain sitting in over there, and they like are dying to get in there and see what's down there. You can see it's not bedrock, it's dirt. Right. So what's in there? So what we think we found here is the second temple pool, second temple era pool, and what you would expect though is that the first temple pool would be underneath it, right? So that's what they're going to be going after very soon. This is the end of that Hezekiah's tunnel, okay? It would have drained the water into this pool. But he's first temple, so now that's what we're going to be looking for, okay? The people came out already above because it gets too narrow over here. Like you could see the base of buildings. and the base of pillars. Like, it's so exciting that we get to go into this now. Very often you'll see Christians here. I don't know if that's what this group is with the New Testament, because again, they have a thing with water. Miracles happen near water. So for them, this is the pool of Siloam, where a blind woman was healed. Miracles happen by water. So a lot of times, this is a very big pool for them. And that's why there was an enormous church that was put here in the Byzantine period, which destroyed a lot of other things here. The church was over here. This has all been discovered in the last, where are they? Where did they come here? Yeah, I can't take you in here. This is really cool. Look at these guys right here. That's okay. Okay, this has all been discovered in the last couple of years. It turns out that there was an enormous staircase that led from here up to the temple. And now it turns out that there was more than one staircase, and there were different staircases that converged. They have found the staircases where there's a level of destruction at 70. There's ashes, so it went down with the temple. There's other areas that weren't destroyed, so they were possibly, there's now one piece of road that they're dating to Pontius Pilate, okay, which is the 30s. Okay, so the temple is still up, and he's the prefect here, and the governor of the Roman governor in Jerusalem. There's others that have been found to date to between the revolts, because there's another revolt in 132, the Bar Kokhba revolt. So this is now, when you're reading on the news about like the pilgrim's staircase, this is part of what you're reading about. It's not yet open to the public. Okay, I've been here because they've opened it for tour guides and on other special occasions, and it is just amazing. Okay, and this goes all the way up, like to the old city of today. And one day this will be open, huh? This is Second Temple. This is like 2,000 years old, for sure. For sure. And the plan is, here's the archaeologists, they're working here, they're filling the sandbags with dirt, they're going to investigate all this stuff. Once they fix this up, you'll be able to walk from here all the way back into the Kotel. And that's one of the plans. You like the music that they're listening to here?
They're singing a lot.
Okay, yeah, it's very cute. All right, so here, this is a picture of what we think at this point this would have looked like. Okay, you come to this big pool, all right, which was maybe a mikvah, the last ritual bath. Part of it was probably also for drinking. We're not really sure how it was set up. And then you took this massive staircase up, 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 and eventually got to where the temple is, all right? And this is now underground, but this is what they're digging out under here. It's really wild. All right, and they're making the pilgrimage, they're going up the stairs. There's a discussion in the Talmud about how old a child has to be to go to the temple. If you have to, even if you're young enough, you still have to be carried, or if you can walk on your own. So that's what this picture recreates. The Romans, literally, they heard the Jews were hiding under the stairs, all right? And the Romans heard them and pulled up the rocks on the stairs and killed the Jews. So when we found some of these stairs and we found places where the rocks had been pulled up, and then the archaeologist opens Josephus, and it's exactly the way it was described. And they found cooking pots under the stair, like in the sewage system under the stairs, because no, it was where the water drained under the stairs, like a gutter. But let's say imams went down there with their children to try and hide from the Romans and hope the Romans would go away, and then they could sneak out. They could get to Masada, or they could get out to the Dead Sea and be safe. So of course they took food with them. All right, so we found those cooking pots. This is a picture of the cooking pots here, all right, that we found whole. All right, cooking pots found in the drainage channel near the Shiloach pool that were found under here. And then Josephus talks about how the Romans heard them and caught them and killed them. So what the Romans did was very smart in terms of the Romans. How did they killed 1 million Jews in Jerusalem? There were not 1 million Jews living in Jerusalem. It was a small city. What did they do? They came on Passover. The Jews all came to the temple on Passover, and the Romans then trapped them in Jerusalem on Passover. And Josephus is scathing in his criticism. He said the Romans did what nobody else ever did. There were I guess, gentleman's rules, like you don't bomb a Red Cross ship. There's which, of course, is a red line that everybody crosses now, but there used to be rules even in warfare that you didn't do, and that the Romans did something that was just terrible. And here Jews were praying to God, and the Romans used that, where the Jews were coming on pilgrimage, in in order to capture them and kill them. All right, so it's interesting that he's very critical of the Romans because he's writing under the Romans, but it could be that A, he was so appalled that he had to write it, or B, that the Romans were proud of it. They were like, yeah, aren't we smart? Why chase the Jews all around the country? We can just capture them when they're all in Jerusalem. All right, so this is very reminiscent, of course, of things that didn't happen all so long ago, like in the Warsaw Ghetto, you know, where the Jews would go and hide in the sewers and hide from the Germans. And so ultimately, we're here today. You know, like the Jews then would have thought like they were finished. Judea was being destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and that was going to be it. Except that here in 2020, the Romans are like a nice piece in our history books, and the Jews came home again. And you are proof of our victory because you're standing on these stairs and you guys are living full Jewish lives in Israel, and we're having a bat mitzvah tomorrow, and you learn Torah, and you're, you know, and you, if you just think about it for a second, to the people that died here, you could say to them, it wasn't for nothing, all right? Because we kept it going and you didn't die for nothing.